So, how do you make the most out of the Task Management and Time Blocking Virtual Summit 2021? In case we haven't met, my name is Francis Wade. And how can you be sure that you won't regret that you spent time 3 days, didn't learn anything, didn't get anything? How can you make sure that you get something of superior value? Well, in this session, which I recommend that you do before the other sessions, we're going to be covering some steps that would allow you to set a context and put in place some thinking that would allow you to get the most out of this particular event. And just to repeat that question, how can you make the most of it? Because I imagine that you're not here for no reason. That you're here because you at one point enjoyed your task management and time blocking. As a person who picked up some new techniques and some new habits and practices, you said, this is amazing and this is awesome. And maybe something changed. Perhaps no, not so much. You've noticed that some things are happening that make you think twice. And maybe those things have brought you here to the summit. So we call them unwanted symptoms. And here are a few of them. So there's running late. There's having an unbalanced life, feeling a sense of overwhelm, falling behind on email, missing deadlines, jumping out of your sleep, all of a sudden remembering something that you forgot to do, feeling guilty, all kinds of feelings that maybe you thought you had gotten rid of when you made the changes to the system that you had from the system you had before to the one you have today. And maybe as you examine the system that you have today and the practices that comprise it, they've kind of lost their thrill. They've kind of become a bit heavy, maybe a bit burdensome. For example, if you're time blocking, the practices that we must engage in as time blockers, which is to set up a daily schedule, change your calendar, especially when surprises take place, and also revise the estimates that come from making mistakes with the planning fallacy, thinking that things take much shorter than they actually take. That these practices become a bit painful. And you may have come here wondering, am I the only person feeling this way about my task management and my time blocking? And you may be concerned that if you don't address the situation soon, you may find yourself going back to what you used to do, being ineffective. You may think that all I have to do is just put my head down and try harder. But deep down you think there's got to be a better way than just trying harder. Maybe one of the thoughts you have is that I need to find a new app. I need some new tools. I need new software. Or maybe you think you're here looking for a better guru and you're testing me out to see if I'm the better guru that you should use to replace the one that you had before. But none of these really work, and I think you probably know that. But we don't have a whole lot of good solutions to try on when we get to the point where we see these unwanted symptoms and we feel a sense of fatigue with the practices that we're currently using. The truth is, it's not a matter of doing what you're already doing harder. It's really a matter of brand new skills and transitioning to them, finding out what they are, checking out a brand new standard, moving to that standard over time and making an improvement. Unfortunately, a lot of researchers and content creators and coaches that we rely on in the world, they're not being very useful at this point when it comes to this kind of situation or obstacle. They mostly are telling us to do things like, oh, you need to try time blocking. Oh, you need to use this system or pick up GTD. They're giving very superficial advice. Not the details that you need once you become someone who is an advanced manager of your tasks. They're really speaking to people who are brand new, to novices, not to people who have experience like maybe you do. And it's frustrating to not have someone offer more advanced thinking in task management. I'm time blocking. And pretty much that's why we have the summit, because we believe that by offering you these advanced thoughts, thinking, theories, practices, apps, that they'll be the key to you fulfilling something very important to you, sort of like your true potential. And offer you a freedom to continue to expand, to meet your goals, to take on more projects, and to move to greater accomplishments. You may just want to earn more money, greater accomplishment. You may want to raise your kids so that you spend more time with them. You may want to change the climate, affect climate change. Whatever your aspirations are, those aspirations translate into projects, which translate into tasks. And the bigger the aspiration, the more the tasks. So your task management can be a bottleneck to the accomplishment of really big and important objectives that you set for yourself. So for you, I'm assuming that you're probably somewhat driven. You're probably an achiever who is looking to do more. Maybe you have some type A tendencies. In the past, you've made some transitions from old techniques. You taught yourself some new techniques, and you have seen yourself improve as you made these changes from one system to the next, one set of techniques to the other. And you benefited from them. So given the fact that you know how to make these changes, let's talk about the change that I'd like for you to experience in this event. We really want to have you experience a transformation. That's the purpose of the task management and time blocking summit, where you go from seeing these unwanted symptoms, as I mentioned, not having solutions from people who are out there really with basic answers, feeling as if you don't have others who are in the same boat, other people who are more advanced in task management, and a bit confused about your choices because there's just so many people saying that they have answers out there. And transformation would be from that sort of situation and experience to one in which you have a very clear pathway. So you'd have spent the 3 days coming up with a pathway for yourself to follow. One that's sustainable, one that you could follow, because it actually has some legs based on some scientific evidence, and easy in the sense that it's straightforward but not too simplistic. So not so simplistic that you could reject it out of hand and say, "Oh, I already know that, I've already heard it a million times." In fact, I tell people that over and over again. And I've really struggled to have my own transformations and have taken this pathway where I used to use lists and a little bit of time blocking in the 90s, learned to teach a program on time blocking in 2000, 2001, subsequently moved from Florida to live in Jamaica in 2005. Within months, found myself in a panic because I was falling behind. All the symptoms that I mentioned before, I was experiencing a whole side of them, and the number of tasks I was having to manage just seemed to be ballooning. I thought I was doing something wrong and said, okay, well, maybe I could try this GTD thing, because I had read the book, read it again, tried to implement it, and then bam, double panic, things got worse. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind to say maybe the fault is mine here. I shouldn't have gone back to using lists. I should stay with time blocking. So I returned to time blocking in 2007, made some important changes to the way I was time blocking, and then eventually in 2014 made yet another change with the advent of the most recent auto schedulers. So why did I take that zigzag where I was going like, well, there was no pathway outlined for me, no understanding of the progression I should take. I had no plans. I was just basically jumping from one to the next without an overall understanding of what happens when task volume increases and how you need to change your techniques accordingly. Having said that, we've designed the summit around two basics. One is that there is no one size fits all. That there is no one technique to use for your entire life. It may work for you the way using lists worked for me in the 90s, but chances are the level of task volume that you're trying to manage is continuously increasing, and the techniques that you use no longer work. And this game of adjusting is one that we all need to be doing. So the basic number one is that there's no one size fits all. The second basic is that we want to be practical here at the summit. That this is not about theory and about being in graduate school and studying something at an abstract level. We're looking for cement, blocks, a trowel, practical tools that would allow us to behave differently. So, with those two basics in mind, here's what I like to focus on here in core session number 1. The first is to encourage you to replace the guru. The second is to talk about your need to deepen your self-evaluation skills. And the third is I'm going to offer you a method of self-evaluation very quickly. So let's talk about the guru. So back in 2001 when I first taught time blocking training. So back then I remember after I led a training, I had a conversation with my mom a few months later and said, how was it? How are you using the things I taught? And she said, well, tell you the truth, I'm not really using any of it. And I was like, but. And I argued and I said, oh, you should be. And I said, oh, discipline. And I said, you don't understand. I said all these dumb things, kind of awful, right? And she said, oh, well, but I walked away and I had to accept that what I had taught her didn't stick. And as I look back at 2001 compared to where we are now, I see that the assumption back then was that the learners would be passive, that they would follow a detailed script of behaviors given out from me, the guru, and that the best learner would be the one who followed the prescription faithfully. So that was the model of learning that was assumed back then. Now in 2019, 20, 21, we have a different paradigm. And the way for a transformation to happen is not to follow someone's prescription, but instead is to be very active in your learning, very critical almost, very discerning, to take ownership of changes that you decide to make. And to, in the case of a complex system of managing tasks, which we all have, developing an ability to do these self-evaluations. And the good news is that, listen, you already know how to do some level of self-evaluations. How do I know? Because at some point, you've contended with someone's ideas. And you either read a book or took a course or you sat down with a coach and they gave you some ideas that you later said, I think I'll use some of them, but not all. And here's an example. So Getting Things Done said in the very first edition that there are 3 things that are going in your calendar on your hard landscape: time-specific actions, day-specific actions, and day-specific information. The idea was you do not do time blocking. Instead, your calendar should be sacred. And sacred means no tasks in your calendar. Fast forward to 2020, 2021, and at the Schedule U website, I have a reference to David Allen's thinking, recent thinking, and how he's changed his mind. Because he said on the GTD forums on his website that he supports time blocking. That's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. So he's no longer advising against it. So if at some point in the past, when you encounter GTD, you wondered, he says don't do time blocking. He's changed his mind, and so perhaps have you. So your self-evaluation may have gotten you there before even David Allen did. But as you sit and listen to anyone who gives you advice, the idea is to judge it critically, not to accept it wholesale the way I wanted my mom just to accept what I was saying, but to take it, think about it, and ask, will that work for me? And as a learner, you need to learn to judge exactly what you're hearing as it's being told to you. In other words, I'm asking you to become your own guru, to become the person who does your own evaluation, has a particular body of knowledge, can analyze your system in full, and use it to make improvements on your own. Now, that is not easy to do, but imagine what it would be like. And here I would pause and actually have you think about it. And I would have you, if you're in front of me, we would have a whole conversation. What would it be like for you to be your own guru? to develop the information, do your own evaluations, and make your own improvements. What skills or knowledge would be required to do that? Well, let's suppose that you're actually here at the Task Management and Time Blocking Summit in order to get those bits of skills, those skills, and to grab that knowledge. Let's have it be about that. So let's talk about self-evaluation. If we're on the road, let's go and see how it turns out. So self-evaluation is critical for transformation, as opposed to just being in the summit trying to be entertained or engaged or just trying to gain some additional information. A transformation requires for you to engage your critical thinking and to do these kinds of evaluations, because as I said, task management it comprises a complex system we'll talk about in a few minutes. But to help us understand the way your system works, let's coin a term that I mentioned in my book, came out from more research, which is that of a time demand. So a time demand is an internal individual action commitment to complete an action in the future. It's a kind of task that you assign to yourself. And the reason that we define it is that people get confused about tasks. Even the dictionary defines a task as something that one person gives to another. But when we talk about time demands, we're only talking about commitments that you make to yourself, where you have agency or ownership. So where do time demands come from? Well, between the ages of 7 and 8, you were taught the concept of time. You discovered it from someone who taught it to you. You were always taught the concept of time. Shortly after, you started to create these internal time demands. You started to promise yourself to do things in the future. You discovered that time was a resource that could help you to accomplish your goals. And maybe in the very beginning, you had very few time demands. At that age, you had parents and you had teachers and you had other people, siblings, to remind you when you needed to execute time demands. So they, in a way, were helping you to keep these time demands alive. Over time, they got tired of the job and they no longer wanted to remind you. And at the same time, the number of tasks increased. So the two things happened at the same time, and you needed to develop personal habits and practices in order to keep these time demands alive. Over time, they turned into a personal system. And this personal system was developed somewhere around perhaps the age of 18. Used to be that the system would last you for the rest of your life. In our day and age, however, it won't, because the number of tasks is increasing too much. So how do you understand this system? Well, our research has shown that it's made up of 7 basic fundamentals. And the way this works is pretty simple. You may have heard some of these terms before. Capturing is the action of saving a time demand right at the moment of creation, somewhere where it can be retrieved from later, like your memory, or on paper, or in a smartphone, or in a laptop. Emptying is the action of removing that time demand from the temporary place of storage, from the capture point, and dealing with it in 5 different ways. One is to toss, which is to void the time demand. To list is to add it to a list of some kind, add it to a schedule, to store some important aspect of it in a contact information database or in a password database, or you could act on it right away, act on it immediately. Those are the 5 moves that you have, and these are the 7 basic fundamentals that we adults all use. Unknown to us perhaps, but we're all using them. In addition to the 7 basic fundamentals, there are 4 advanced fundamentals: interrupting, switching, warning, and reviewing. Interrupting is setting an alarm or asking someone to stop you doing what you're doing so that you can make a decision about whether to continue. Or to switch, which is the next fundamental. Switching involves choosing what task or time demand to take on next. Warning is a proactive indication from your system that something is about to break, like a dashboard on your car. And reviewing is the action of looking over the fundamentals and the time demands in your system to make sure that everything is working the way it should, or whether you should make some improvements or make some changes. Those are the four advanced fundamentals. Then there are two executables, habiting and flowing. So when you actually now go to do a time demand, the two ways to do it are to do it via habit, like brushing your teeth, or to enter the flow state, according to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is, in other words, to do deep work and give it your complete attention. Those are the two ways in which we engage and do actions. So these are 13 fundamentals. And as I mentioned before, all adults are using these with varying levels of skill. So here's a typical profile that someone has developed based on their analysis of in this case, they're doing the basics and the advanced. It's the kind of information I collect when I do a training, and we've collected data from hundreds of participants. This looks just like this, where the white belt is the lowest and the green belt is the highest level of skill. And this person is a white belt. They have mostly lower skills. But here are a couple. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see what these are about. Here are a couple of examples side by side of two different folks who have taken our training. So Andrea, in this case, Andrea and Jerry. So Andrea, this is a complete profile, more detailed than the one that you saw before. It actually shows the sub-skills that are underneath each of the fundamentals. The diagram you saw before was a bit of a summary. So that was a summary level. This is the detail level. And to zoom in on Andrea's, you can see that she has some green belt skills, which are pretty high, and then some skills which are lower. However, Jerry is a different kind of animal, different person, more white belt skills. So he is probably less effective or productive than Andrea. And this is typical of the information that we've collected from my training. So as Jerry and Andrea now start to think about improvement, what's important to note is that they could focus on one skill at a time. Like, I'm going to focus on tossing, and I'm going to focus on scheduling. But that may yield a certain level of improvement. And we call that a tier 1 improvement. But a tier 2 improvement is to acknowledge that these aren't separate skills. Like, for example, like the skills in a decathlon, for example. When you do a decathlon and you're doing pole vaulting over here and long jumping over there, there's not a complex system. There really are distinct disciplines. The individual doing them may be tired between one and the other. It might be the only connection. But they require very different kinds of activities and they don't interact with each other. But look at how a watch works. So a watch produces a time, and if the watch is running 5 minutes late, it could be any number of things that are wrong with it. And if you understand how watches work, you can be effective in diagnosing just exactly why your watch isn't working. Same goes for a car. Complex systems require a certain level of knowledge in order to perform a great diagnosis. That way you don't make a mistake that if your watch is running 5 minutes late that you say, oh, let me change the wristband, the watch band. Or if your car won't start, you don't say, oh, let me change the tires. Complex understanding of a complex system gives you a certain amount of power, right? Well, that's the kind of power we want to have when it comes to task management. The fundamentals are the building blocks, but they aren't independent of each other. They're very dependent on each other. So, for example, I said Andrea has some strengths over here and some weaknesses over here. So if you were her, where would you focus your time and effort? To get the biggest bang for your buck and to deal with and address the unwanted symptoms that she's been experiencing. So if you pause for a moment and just think about that. Should she work on capturing, emptying, tossing, acting no, storing, scheduling, listing? Or should she work on interrupting, switching, reviewing, warning? Or should she focus on one of the executables, habiting, and flowing? Well, it depends, right? Just looking at her profile alone gives you a certain amount of information. But you'd also need to know, okay, what exactly are the unwanted symptoms she's experiencing? And then if you combine the both, you could perhaps better if you teach her to do her own diagnosis, because that's what I want for you. That level of specificity so that you don't waste your time trying to change your tires when your car won't start. And then there's a third level, which is meta. A meta level, which is improving the way you make your improvements. And we're not going to focus too much on this level in the summit. We're focusing really more on the first two. But the truth is, adults are always making tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 improvements. However, they're happening in an ad hoc fashion. They're happening randomly and by luck. So what you really need is a systematic method to do self-evaluations so that you can zero in on the precise causes of the unwanted symptoms you're experiencing. So I'm going to suggest, in addition to the knowledge that you'll gain from more than 35 speakers here at the summit, all the sessions that you'll be listening to, that you follow the ETAPS process. And let me go through each of them one by one. So E in ETAPS stands for evaluating your current skills. And there's an informal way to do that where you'll be sitting in a session, listening or watching a pre-recorded video or listening to a panel. And as you do so, you will be comparing and maybe asking yourself, what is the new standard that they're describing? And where am I right now with respect to that new standard? So you're asking yourself, is there a gap? If there's a gap, you may then go on to ask yourself, what do I do with it? But let's just talk about the gap, which is the evaluation step at this point. So that was informal, just asking yourself those two questions, which I'm going to ask you to do in every session. However, there is a formal method that I'm going to share with you that comes from my book and also from the My Time Design assessment that I'll share with you in a few minutes. And it involves using a cheat sheet, a way of measuring where you are right now. So in the cheat sheet for capturing, here's Bob. Bob has evaluated himself along the 4 dimensions or using the 4 sub-skills. He's decided that I'm a white belt in the first one and I'm a yellow belt in the subsequent 3. And overall, that makes him a white belt because the overall belt always takes the lowest belt. So once Bob has finished his first evaluation, the question is, what level should he move to next? And here you see that there's 4 possible moves that Bob could make. So Bob could go from being a white belt in the first skill to being a yellow belt. Or he could go from being a yellow belt in one of the subsequent 3 skills to being an orange belt. So which one should he do first? Chances are you'd probably say, which I would probably say as well, that he should go for that first one, carrying a manual capture point at all times. Because that seems like a really important skill. And if you don't do that one well, improving the others probably won't make that much of a difference. So let's imagine that he moves from being a white belt to a yellow belt in the first discipline. But then what? What does he improve next? Let's say he really wants to get to become a green belt. How quickly should he try to be a green belt, and in what sequence should he make the changes? Not a simple question, but it could make all the difference because, as you know, it's far easier to make changes when you focus on sub-skills. It's way more difficult to make these changes when you try to, someone just says to you, go improve your capturing. It's much more difficult to make real progress. So, should he complete the yellow belt, then the orange, and then the green? Maybe. How fast should he do it? Well, now he needs a plan. Third step in ETAPS is to create a plan. And that plan probably shouldn't involve making 4 different changes all at once. Instead, a good plan, according to a good coach, would be to spread those changes out over time and have them occur one or 2 at a time. That's just good practice when it comes to making changes like this. So here at the summit, one of the things that we've noticed, one of the paths or the ways that people change, we've noticed that people tend to make one of six changes. I'm going to invite you to focus on just one of these pathways. So the first is that you are currently at a digital task list, a simple one like Google Keep or Apple Notes, and you want to move to a more complex one like OmniFocus or Todoist. That's one kind of change. The second is that you could improve the way you do use your complex task app. A third could be that you're moving from a complex task app to a calendar of tasks or to an auto scheduler. The fourth might be improving the way you use your digital calendar to do time blocking. The fifth could be improving the way you use your auto scheduler, again, to do time blocking. And the sixth could be moving from a calendar of tasks to using an auto scheduler. So I'm going to recommend that you pick one pathway and focus on it throughout the duration of this particular summit. The final step in the ETAPS process is to get some support. And that could be having a coach or just finding a partner. It could be setting up games. It could be joining our Mighty Taskers community, where you can have a whole community that's focused on what we call mega tasking, which is managing lots of tasks at one time, which is what ambitious people do. So gamification involves creating small games for yourself. Habit tracking also works, and penalties and rewards, or anything that can help you to support yourself in making the change. So if you're interested in following the evaluation methods that I just described, as I mentioned, they are described in detail in my book, Perfect Time-Based Productivity, and you can find the book at perfect.mytimedesign.com. I'm also offering an online training, which right now is 50% off the usual price. So the price for the summit, while we're here for the next few days, is $14.99, and it allows you in 20 to 30 minutes to do a self-evaluation. of your task. So you come away with a bit of a snapshot of the profile that you saw before. And you can access that at bit.ly/summit-mtd assessment. So, your 3-day mission. I'm about to set you free and to attend the rest of the summit. The first is to get some specific knowledge, is to listen into the pre-recordings, listen into the live sessions, and learn some stuff you didn't know before. The second is to notice and improve your self-evaluation skills. These are the hallmarks. These skills are a hallmark of advanced task management and time blocking. And the third is to walk away with a written plan of improvement. Not one that's vague and one day you will, but to actually accomplish that. Now, to accomplish your mission, I recommend that you give 100% of your attention to whatever it is that you're doing in the moment, whichever session you're in, and not be distracted by a smartphone and Facebook and Instagram and email. That you set time aside to do those things if you need to time block them. But while you're in session, you're in session. If you accomplish those 3 milestones, those 3 bits of the mission accomplished, it could be a really big win. It could be a very first step on your way to this kind of transformation of your task management and time blocking. So where do you start? Well, you start by checking out the schedule, sitting and listening in, but I also recommend that you have at your side the workbook. So we put together a workbook for the summit. That's a place, it's actually on Google Drive. You can copy it over to your Google Drive. It's at bit.ly/summit.workbook. And it's a fillable workbook where you can track along and write down the improvements that you want to make during the next 3 days. And then finally, there is a quiz. And the quiz, you might say, Francis, you're torturing us now. Well, the truth is, the intention of the quiz is to give you an opportunity to retain what you've learned, because you may already know that when you do a quiz, it helps you to remember and really learn and cement the new ideas that you heard. So spend a few minutes, bit.ly/core1-quiz. To complete the quiz. It's just meant to be fun. I'm not collecting the results, and I won't report them to your grade school teacher. They're really just for you to reflect. And where you miss something, just rewind the video and catch the pieces that you may have missed. So this is Francis Wade. I'm going to be signing out here from course session number 1. And I hope you enjoy the summit and all that it has to offer. And let's have it be a transformation that you won't forget, and one that makes a profound difference. Take care, and I wish you all the best, and signing out, hoping that you make the most of this adventure. Bye now.